So this is a long overdue video that I meant to do quite some time ago. This is the install video of adtr's hydraulic kit for the manual swapped Panthers. I'm gonna go over what comes with the kit, and then we're gonna go step by step on the car with all these parts. Okay, let's talk about the pedal itself. Now, this is an early version of the pedal, so forget about the second hole that it's been drilled here. Um, this unit is fairly simple by design, and was meant to be like that because the whole purpose of this is to be able to fit as many generation of Panther as possible. Although there's always going to be like some very specific stuff that you will encounter, um, like firewall being different on a Lincoln Town Car than on a Crown Vic. And even though through the years, 91 firewall will be different from 92 and so on. So I don't know by heart all of these differences, but you get the point. So it's fairly simple by design. It's meant to be as universal as possible. So you have a nut here to insert the neutral safety switch. This should be pretty straightforward. The two holes here are going actually over the brake pedal assembly as is, unlike in the past where you had to replace the whole thing. Now this thing just sits right by the brake pedal assembly without any further modification. So this goes on the two studs of the master, the brake booster, and then on top of the dashboard there's actually another provision for this screw here that will go on top. Like it's been mentioned, fairly simple too. That will go with the hardware for the master cylinder. Another pretty important part is this brace. The outline of this matches exactly the outline of the firewall on most Panthers. Once again, it was meant like that, so with the notch here you can easily align this with the two studs from the brake booster. Then you're gonna have to stick your master cylinder through this, use two nuts, and be it. Now the slave cylinder, fairly simple by design too. What would be my recommendation is to take a look at this particular bracket here. Now, as we found out over the last few months and more recently, is that depending of what you are using as far as the clutch and pressure plate kit, some of the early kits came with a second set of holes that was more or less aligned with this mark here, that would give you two options of mounting, either here or further closer to the pressure plate. So I'll get back to this later on. Just keep in mind that it's going to be covered more in details. Push rod, it just goes in there with the boot. That will attach to the fork this way. And then you have the adjustment here and the contact point that will go right in there. So that's it for now. Hydraulic master cylinder, 3/4 bore. It's meant to match the volume of this one. So if you're sourcing out your parts, keep in mind that if you increase the bore, you will decrease the pressure, and you will increase also the risk of popping the piston out of the bore if it's not set up properly. Going too small of a master, you will actually run out of volume before you fully depress the clutch. So this was meant to go with this one here. Of course, you're gonna have to remove the reservoir from it. There's a whole kit that comes with that to relocate this. So once again, we will cover this later on. The switch here, I know some of the kits didn't come with the right one. It's been a problem here. So the right one, if you're looking for the part number, is from standard product. It's SLS66T. That's the right one to use, and you will be using the two front prongs here to use this as a neutral safety switch. This will go obviously on the pedal shaft that will connect with the master cylinder rod, and that is if you guys want to go the extra mile and replace the brake pad on your Crown Vic or whatever brake pedal assembly. Either use it as a template to cut exactly the large brake pad, or if you want to go the extra mile, you can always get it down and weld this on top of the brake pedal shaft, and then you will have the brand new OEM pad to match the whole kit there, so it's gonna look fancy, just like this right here. So next video we're gonna get deeper into it. We're gonna install the pedals, the master cylinder reservoir, the slave and such, so stay tuned for the other videos. Let's start with the slave cylinder. I know a lot of people are reluctant to read the instruction, but you should. There's a lot of things that are very important into this. Now I just replicate the picture of the instruction here. So this is the bracket that is holding the slave cylinder. You've got the two bolts going into the transmission casing, the one here that will go right there on the corner of the opening of the window of the fork. Two screws mounting the slave cylinder, and you've got the push rod that just goes into there. Do this like that, and this is the correct orientation of the parts. Once again, everything that I'm showing you right now is part of the instruction. My advice is to put a dab of grease here. Same for the contact surface here and here. I'm using some fifth wheel grease, something that doesn't wash off with water, something pretty heavy. So you know, this is sliding in and out without any effort. Now I'll say it about 2 or 3 times through this whole installation. This bracket here may need to be modified. Why? Because we recently found out that depending of the clutch kit you bought, it may be required to move the slave further to the front like this. Why is that? The fingers on some kits are actually inward, while some on other kits are outward. What does that mean? It means that the geometry of the fork when pressing on the pressure plate will be off if it's sitting in the center or even past that. Now, sorry for that. You do have some adjustment, but in the case that you have, let's say, the wrong clutch kit, I will recommend you to drill new holes pretty much where you get to see the line here. I'll get back to you with the proper sizing and tap and drill bit to use for that, but you get the point that you will have to move the whole assembly there. Now I know it might sound confusing for now. We'll get back to it later on when we work on the transmission. So in the event that you need to actually move the slave cylinder forward because of your clutch, here's the procedure. Now we've got the bracket here, which is made out of stainless steel, so it's going to be a little harder to drill through, but it's not impossible. You need a 1/8 drill bit, cobalt or whatever you can find will just make your life easier. Then 21/64 for a tap of 3/8 which is a fine thread. Basically, just to give you an idea, instead of being here, it's going to move our slave right here. So notice that the ear radius is just more or less matching the radius here. So that will give us a good step forward. I actually punched some pilot hole right here from the outer edge of that mark here. There's 1/8 of an inch. 1/8 of an inch. Just make sure, of course, that you are square with your bracket, and that's the only thing that really matters. Now, so go very slowly. Don't spin the drill bit like no tomorrow. Just go as slow as you can at first until you know it goes in, and then when you tap this, proceed with caution. If you're crooked or off center, you will jam the tap and eventually break it, and then you will have even more problems. And of course, I highly recommend doing this on a bench in a vise, not on a car. It's just going to be way harder for no real reasons. There we go. Now, in a perfect world, you would do this whole thing while the transmission is out of the car. But since it's not the case here, it's really up to you. But here's one way to do it while the transmission is on the car. One thing you should notice while the cable is out is how the fingers are actually inward. That is why we have to modify the bracket to be able to use the slave cylinder on this particular setup. On all of the clutches I've used on my car, the fingers were always outward. So the resting position of the fork was more or less this close. So see, it's not a huge gap, probably 3/8, half inch max, but it's a huge difference for the geometry of the fork. While you are at it, you may as well just take a little look, a quick look to that bearing there. Stick your hand in there and spin it. Hear if there's some grinding noise on the bearing. If so, you're gonna have to drop the transmission and replace it. So yeah, so we're gonna be removing the weight on the fork here. It calls for a 13 socket right there, so we're gonna get this out of there, and we're gonna use a cable system to pull on the fork so we can actually start doing the installation of the bracket. Okay, for the purpose of this video, I ended up, well, you're gonna have to do it anyways, I removed the I think it's lead that was attached here with a 13 mil bolt. So now we have a little bit more room to take a look inside. Notice what I was mentioning before. The fingers on this, kind of hard to pick up with the camera. The fingers on the pressure plate are actually inward, while it should be outward. So because they're inward, you're gonna have to bring the fork even further like that to make actually contact with the fingers, so you're kind of messing up with the geometry of the fork. So by having the good pressure plate that has the fingers outward, you actually have to slightly move it, the fork, like that, and then it makes contact with the fingers. It doesn't seems to be a lot, but considering that 3/8 there means like almost 2 inches of travel, it means a lot. While you have the fork like that, you may as well stick your hand into the hole and hear the bearing, the throughout bearing. This one has 90,000 miles on it. I don't know how well the camera is picking up the sound. We can hear it. It's not driving me crazy. Of course, you won't even hear it while you're driving unless it's really bad and it whines like no tomorrow. But I'm probably gonna replace it this summer, and perhaps probably the clutch too. So anyways, so take a look at it, and this is why I'm not a huge fan of buying all used part. I understand everybody is on a budget while doing this, but if there's one thing I wouldn't skip on is actually buying a brand new throughout bearing. It's just a no-brainer. For the amount of work it is to replace that bearing, may as well do it right away. So okay, now we're gonna proceed to compress the fork to get us some good clearance so we can start working on the bracket. Of course, if you do that while the transmission is out there, it's a walk in the park. Now we're doing the hard way here, but still easier than dropping the transmission. So let's take a look at the next step. Now we are entering a rather dangerous part of this project here. I'm asking you to proceed with extreme caution while compressing the pressure plate here, for obvious reason, because you're going to have to work here, although I do not recommend putting your hand into it for whatever reason. You don't really have to. I know it may look kind of dangerous. Believe me, this is extremely solid. The way it's done, it cannot slip out of there. There's this hook on the cross member. It's resting at the bottom here, and then the hook on the fork. I've seen people doing that with tie wraps, like a whole bunch of tie wraps, which would make me feel very nervous. You know, I'm asking you to proceed with extreme caution with that, okay? Your own safety is your responsibility. So please be careful at this step. So now that the fork is out of the way, we do actually have some room to remove the bolt here and the other one there. So then we will be able to install our bracket there with the provided hardware, and finally installed the slave cylinder. So I left the socket on top of the bolt so you can actually see where they're at. They're 13 mil bolts, the one here and one on top there. The one on top can be reached with a 3/8 drive wrench, but the one at the bottom, because of the angle, I've managed to get it out with a 13 mil once again, but a quarter drive ratchet. So it was a little tricky, but it was doable. There's not a lot of tension on those bolts, so it's not the end of the world. So take this out, and we will be putting the the bracket on it. So we do have our bolts installed and torqued down. Now there's actually no values regarding the torque spec on the instruction manual. So I looked online for the transmission casing and bell housing. I found 23 foot-pound, which is quite a lot. This is what I've done on my transmission, and I ended up stripping the threads on the casing, which I was really not too happy about it. So I ended up on that transmission torquing these bolts to 100 pounds inch. So that kind of feels right about it. For the lower bolt here, you're not going to be able to use your torque wrench, or you're gonna probably have to go by feel if you're doing it on the car. If you're doing it outside of the car, obviously it's not such an issue. So there it is. Okay, now I'm gonna ask you guys to be careful with what I'm going to say. There's two ways to install this, and it's going to depend solely on how the fingers on the pressure plates are. Example number one, we're using a clutch kit that has the fingers outward. So this would be the normal resting position of the fork, which is way further back. So we would mount the slave on the two holes further back, and just imagine that we're bottoming out this piston here. It's gonna end up right here inside, and then we will have this part that has a slight radius on it making contact here, and then we would adjust this to have like a good preload on the bearing. That is example number one. Now if you're using, just like in this case, a clutch kit that has the fingers going inward, the issue that we're facing is that by the time the fork and the bearing are making contact, if we leave the slave at the normal position, and once again with the piston bottom out, we are running out of travel. So that means that the piston will actually have to move like 1/3 before it actually makes contact. So you're losing stroke right here. You're losing a lot of stroke. So that's why we ended up drilling two holes. So we're going to move the slave closer to the fork, and thus letting us use the adjustment here and making it happen. Now this transmission, regardless if it was a cable or hydraulic, it worked like that for the last 90,000 miles. It's still gonna work, but the geometry of the fork is not ideal. The best way is to have it further back like that and using the tools. But I do understand, and you have to understand this, that depending on what you're having, you may not have the luxury of having like the perfect geometry for the fork. Be it, unless you want to change your clutch, it's gonna work. It's gonna work. So we're gonna be mounting the slave on the two holes like that. We're gonna have the fork touching the fingers, having a good preload. During the installation, I highly recommend you to use some grease at the tip here, inside the piston there. It's actually quite round in there, so put a lot of grease in there, not gonna hurt. Same thing here, use grease as well as on top here, and that will be it. Of course, read the instruction for that specification. It's fairly simple. It mounts directly into the hole there. Nothing to brag about. There's of course the lock washer on top here. Don't forget it. Make sure that this is installed correctly, because I've seen people doing it the other way, and of course it doesn't quite work well. So we have this end pretty well greased up, as well as inside at the end of this rod. I did the same here on the nut on the fork. So now that the throwout bearing is touching the pressure plate, we're gonna be, I usually put the nut like halfway. So we're gonna install this like that, and we're gonna be pushing on the slave until it either bottoms out or lines up with the holes. Now see that I cannot push any further, so I'm pretty much dead set centered. So I'm gonna put the bolts on this, and then we're gonna be adjusting the preload on the bearing. Now let's talk about the preload. I did it on purpose. I've messed around with the adjustment nut here just to show you how a good preload is important. So now we have the fork resting on, well, not the fork, but the throwout bearing resting on the fingers. Now you would say, oh, it looks good, looks tight to me. But if I push on the rod here, I still can't push the piston. It still bottoms out. So, you know, here, that's not ideal. So we're gonna turn this, whoops, sorry for that, with a 13 mil wrench until I start getting the clutch fork moving slightly, which it just did. So if I'm pressing on the rod, notice that it doesn't move back anymore, and there's still a little bit of play forward, which I can do with my fingers. Okay, I'm not using a pry bar. With only my fingers I can actually move the clutch fork forward. So that would be an ideal preload. Doesn't have to be more than that. If it's more than that, you will wear the throwout bearing sooner than later. And if there's not enough preload, well, you're going to be wasting some of the travel of the piston. So simple as that. Just take your time, go back and forth, experience how it feels. You know what you're looking for. Just a good tension on the fork and the piston not backing up this way like that. As you will drive the car, as parts will wear out, you may have, well, you will have to make some adjustment here. It's not the end of the world. It's fairly easy to do. So that's pretty much it for the slave. Unfortunately, there's no cover that is going on top of this yet. Of course, because of the design of this kit, the dust shield will no longer fit. Looking at something to fix that issue as of now. So once again, take your time. Just make sure it has a good feel. Don't be afraid to make adjustment to experience with that, and you will be good to go. And of course, don't forget to tighten that little lock nut on the bigger nut there. Now, for the purpose of the video, I removed a lot of things around that, including the wheel well, but this can absolutely be done without going that far, but you will have to remove the brake booster and the master cylinder out of there to make yourself some room to work. That is the master cylinder mount. That is going to go inside of the car, not outside, but for the purpose of the video, we're going to show it from the outside. Notice that the shape of this plate actually matches the firewall here. It has a radius there, that angle there. So it's meant to, once again, go inside, but you get the idea of how it's going to go. And there's a notch on top here. So if you use a straight edge, put it right in the center of those two holes and make a line, that will give you the final position of the brace or the plate, whatever you call it. And then that gives you exactly where you're going to be Sorry for that. We're going to be able to do your holes with a hole saw here, and then with a drill bit on the two sides here to mount the master cylinder. So it cannot be any easier than that. You get exactly where it goes. As long as everything is in line with those two holes, you will be good to go. Of course, you will have to make sure that the plate is sitting flat on the firewall, but that's pretty much it. It's pretty foolproof. And once again, it's way easier to do that from the outside than from the inside. So once again, you line up the notch here with the line, and that gives you your layout to drill the holes. Notice that, yes, of course, it is normal to not have this big hole center with that. That's not the purpose. The purpose is to have this plate in line with the two studs for the brake booster. These two holes call for a 1/2 inch drill bit, and here it's 1 inch 3/8. It's slightly bigger than what you have here, but it doesn't really matter. You're gonna have a little bit of room around to do some final adjustment, some final tuning, but fairly easy. Once again, just make sure you do a pilot holes first. Just gonna make your life way easier. Drill from the outside, and that's pretty much it for that part. So we're pretty much set to install the master cylinder. Of course, brake booster is out of the way, just going to be way easier. Don't worry about if you haven't removed the inner fender wheel well. It is not required. You still have enough room to do that in place. So we're going to be mounting the master cylinder from the outside, and we'll be putting the firewall brace from the inside. So, master cylinder installation. So I kind of pre-assembled the master cylinder out of the box. I just put the fitting there and the 90-degree elbow in the back with Teflon. This is the hardware that comes with the master cylinder. Now, because it has some Loctite on it and it's a little bit hard to do with one guy, I'm actually using this stainless steel hardware, 5/16, 1 inch long with lock washer, so it's going to be way easier for me to do it. Notice that you may have to cut some length of this because it doesn't fit like that. It only fits like this, and you will be bottoming out this bolt. It will be making contact there before you get it fully tightened, so you may have to remove I don't know, 1/2 inch thereabout. So you'll have master cylinder, the firewall, and then the brace inside like that. So once the holes have been drilled, I had to cut some of the insulation, and this is where, notice once again here the layout of the firewall, well, the radius kind of match, same as for this angle at the bottom here. So that's gonna go from the inside like that. Then you'll have to stick your bolts through, and that's how it's gonna go from the inside. The plate has been installed inside. You got the two bolts sticking out like that. So I'm gonna gently install the master cylinder just like that. Then you can once again gently put the hardware on it, and you're pretty much set. This side is a little tricky because there's barely enough space to put the lock washer and the nut.
it's totally doable. If you have hands that are small enough, you can always get from inside and then hold it from the inside like that, and then screw your nut on top of it. That's always doable, but kind of a tight fit, so be careful with your hands right there. So we've got our master cylinder in place. It just has a snug fit for now because we may have to do some final adjustment to it. Also put the hydraulic braided hose there. Just make sure that you cap this off in the meantime, just making sure that there's no contamination into the master cylinder. And now we're going to be installing the clutch pedal assembly itself. Doing my best here to get you a good shot of the fitment. So master cylinder is installed on the firewall. Brake booster is also back on it, so we're going to put the clutch pedal assembly inside of the car. So the clutch pedal assembly is meant to be installed directly over the brake pedal assembly. These are the two holes that are gonna go on the studs of the brake booster. So for the sake of this video, I'm just gonna put away the cable there. This is obviously an 05 plus car. And in case you have an 04, you still have plenty of room because of the PCM will be in the way, but there's still plenty of room to install this. But if you want, you can always take it off. It's no big deal. So it goes right like that, and then you're going to be putting back those two 15 mils nuts, and you're going to be putting the one on top that is provided with the kit, which is this one here. So that one goes on top there, and that's pretty much it for this step right there. So you get to see how it does look like. So now this is mounted in place. We've put the yoke and the clevis pin right there. I didn't put the lock nut in the back there, but if you turn this around, you can play with the angle of the pedal, raising or lowering the pedal up to your need for as long as it doesn't compromise the release of the clutch. Now, one thing you have to be careful, if you follow the instruction carefully, you shouldn't have to play around with the height or going left and right with the master cylinder. It should be straight in line with the pedal. Now we're pressing the clutch. See, the push rod is not rubbing on the plate inside of the master cylinder. It's not rubbing at all. So if you're having this kind of issues, well, you will need to readjust the whole plate there, the whole assembly, to make sure that it doesn't rub on it, like I've seen some people having that kind of issue. And then on top here, you're gonna have your spot for the neutral safety switch, and that's pretty much it for the inside part of this clutch pedal assembly. Pretty straightforward. Doesn't have to do much with anything else. Don't have to replace anything else around it. It just goes straight in like that. So a few steps forward, we get to see how it looks like under the car. So after you mounted the pedal, you're going to be using the yoke and the clevis pin that comes with the kit. That goes on the push rod. It's a very simple operation, nothing magical here. Then if you're messing around with this rod, you'll notice that the angle of the pedal changed significantly. Now keep in mind that there's a fine balance between clutch pedal height and clutch release. It might be standing a little higher than the brake pedal, but at least you'll know that you'll have like full stroke to fully release the clutch. One thing that is kind of crucial at this step here, and I'm gonna try to zoom in, is the push rod here. It needs to be exactly at the same height of the pivot here. One way to know that you made it successfully is to press the clutch and pay attention if there's any rubbing sound coming from the washer right here. It should be very free in every orientation on every axle. So we got the pedal in. Now fairly simple operation. Once the pedal's in, you'll be using the yoke and the clevis pin on the push rod here, and you'll have to adjust it to your need. As you can tell, I can play quite a lot with the angle of the pedal. Now keep in mind that you got to make sure that you have enough travel before it hits the the floor pan to make sure that it fully releases the clutch. As far as the adjustment of the position of the master cylinder, you got to be pretty straight. If you follow the instruction carefully, it fits as is. There shouldn't be any corrections to do. One thing you got to keep in mind is when the push rod is entering the master cylinder, it goes through some sort of a washer there. So if you're off axis, it will rub either up and down or left and right or everything like that. Like in this case, it's not rubbing on anything, it's free of movement. That's what you're looking for. If you ever messed up with the installation, just loosen up the two bolts there, play around with the master cylinder to make sure that at the end of the day the push rod is actually very straight to the pivot here and it moves freely. That is a crucial step. So master cylinder reservoir has been mounted here with that little bracket that is provided with the kit. It goes directly on the stud here that holds the car master cylinder. Simple procedure here. That hose is like twice the length, so just cut as you need. Then the fitting goes down there. It's going to be attached on the bracket that was holding the automatic cable, and then we're gonna take a look from underneath the car. So from under the car we get to see the hose, which goes all the way up here to the master cylinder. Use a zip tie here on the bracket that used to hold the cable. So it goes along the transmission. You know, just the tension of the cable itself is good enough. That fitting here, you can play with the angle, so I made it to so the cable, not the cable, but the hose rests on the transmission, so everything is free of movement, but still won't be touching at all or come any close to the cats. Slave cylinders being bleeded. I use a vacuum bleeder. Works like a charm. Then just make sure that all the fittings are tight. Clean that up with some brake cleaner. Double check again. Make sure everything is good. The cover doesn't fit there anymore. You can always kind of modify that end to make it fit. It's really up to you. I've personally haven't put it back on mine, and my car is a daily driver in Canada, so it gets to see some snow and it hasn't been an issue. Although there's a reason why it was there, but as far as it goes for now, I'm not losing any sleep over this. So here's what I have to say regarding the hydraulic kit. I've personally been running that kit on my car for over a year, put a decent amount of miles to it, and it's been super smooth, super reliable, nothing to complain about. I just love it. But I also have to take in consideration the fact that I'm using a McLeod RXT twin disc clutch kit. So that alone makes the whole thing very smooth. Now on Jeremy's car, I was hoping or expecting something just as smooth, and it is not the case. Mind you, the fork geometry is off on his car because of the weird fingers on the clutch, on the pressure plate. But that being said, it is not as smooth as my car. It is still an improvement over what he had before. I'm sure it's going to be very reliable, but it's just not as smooth as I thought it would be. Now, of course, depending on what you are using as far as the clutch and pressure plate kit, this will affect a lot the pedal effort that you will eventually or ultimately get at the end of the day. I have my very first set of cable actuated clutch pedal assembly here, and one of the flaws that the hydraulic kit has is the length of the pedal. It is shorter than the cable one, and by this I mean not physically, but I mean the position of the pivot here, it's way closer to the pedal pad than it is on the cable. So that plays a lot into this whole hydraulic kit. Now there's ways to improve the pressure by playing with basically getting the smallest master cylinder that you can have without running out of stroke, which is the case on this kit. This is the maximum, or at least I should say the minimum master cylinder size required to have a full clutch release with modern driveline slave cylinder. Now it does the job. It's going to be a great kit, but talking to Chris, there's going to be some adjustment made to the hydraulic kit. Still using the same master and slave, but physically speaking the pedal will change to compensate for the lack of leverage with the pedal itself. So overall, still satisfied. Anyways, his car was a time bomb. The cable was about to snap anyways. So there it is. So I hope that answers most of your question. Of course, there's always going to be some things that I probably missed during the video install, or maybe some stuff that is still unclear for you guys. So anyways, hit me up and I'll do my best to answer most of your questions. Once again, thanks for watching and see you soon.